Hi, this is Kevin Stokes with Blue Horizon Notes. This is part 6 of the Profit with Real Estate Notes series. We're going to cover diversification in real estate notes. I'm just hoping to pass on my thoughts about diversification, how it's possible with real estate notes, and other discussions about it. Share this with anyone that you think is important. There's no offer or for an investment or any legal advice here. In real estate, one of the biggest things that you can do is have multiple locations to diversify your portfolio. A lot of times with with landlords, they'll have multiple properties, but a lot of times they're within driving distances. One of the advantages of real estate notes is that you can diversify by operating in different regions of the United States, different states. Um, I think it's pretty easy to do. Most of the notes that are available are nationwide. There's pretty common in a lot of the more populous states to do real estate notes, but there's notes can be found in just about every state in the country that are for sale. I think diversification operates as a pretty good risk mitigation technique. I think it's a way to kind of solidify your portfolio, but there'll be times, man, especially when you're starting out, that perhaps you can't afford to buy more than a single note. I'd like to talk a little bit more about how to approach risk mitigation or think about risk mitigation in real estate notes. In a previous example, we taught this amortization schedule. And just to recap, the vertical is the unpaid balance, the horizontal is the number of payments. In this case, it's a 30-year loan. Um, in this, and I'll also kind of describe this gray bar at the top will represent the property value of the underlying collateral. Now, we're going to pretend that it stays solid and doesn't move. We know that this would go up and down over time depending on what's happening over the 30 years. But just to make it simple, we'll leave it at straight across. When you first get the note, especially if it's at the very beginning, the first payment, there's not much gap between the value of the property and the unpaid balance. So if you've bought this entire note, your capital is tied directly to the value of this property in the sense that um, the backstop of the note is the property value, but you're legally entitled to the unpaid balance. So even if the property value drops immediately after purchasing the note, you still have a borrower that's obligated to pay the full unpaid balance. So um, there's not a lot of risk there per se. But as time goes on, you'll see that as each payment goes along, this light green area will show that the distance between the property value and the unpaid balance becomes wider. And as that gap grows, what capital you have at risk continues to go down. And so with each successive payment in a real estate note, you end up with less capital at risk because your principal is coming back to you, which I think is extremely powerful aspect of notes that you don't get with other types of real estate investments. Now we're going to combine this information with what I previously discussed with partials. Now in a partial, there's a couple of things that occur here. On day one, or on the first payment, the note, the original note holder owns the blue section, that unpaid balance, right? Well, what he has at risk or she has at risk at this particular moment on pay one, or correction, before I do that, the partial owner owns the green, right? So they bought the next 180 or 160 payments for 80,000. So at this particular time, the partial owner has two things that are to their advantage. Number one, they're in an asset that's worth 100,000 for $80,000. So they've got at risk $80,000 in an investment to value ratio of 80%. So they've got this particular gap in coverage. So even if this property slides back to 90,000, it absolutely makes no difference to the partial owner during this time. And then the same thing applies as time goes on, their risk goes down. Well, the original note owner, they're only risking 20,000 at the beginning, and they're into this asset for a much smaller amount, but to offset that, they're giving up the first 160 payments. So it's a trade-off between these two individuals. What's happening for both is that their widening gap between the property value and the unpaid balance owed to them is expanding as they go forward. With the partial owner, because they're on a shorter time horizon, they're getting their principal back at an earlier rate. Their risk is dropping at a much higher rate than the actual original note owner because of the steepness of this curve. And I hope that makes sense. If you do a smaller partial, then that's accentuated even farther. You imagine being into an asset that's worth 100,000 for less than half of that, and you were able to collect the same amount of payments, and you get your principal back in a much shorter time frame. The beautiful thing about this is statistically, somewhere along these payments, depending on whose information you're looking at, there's a good chance that this note is going to pay off early. And that statistical advantage means that you'll be getting all your principal back in a much earlier time frame. And so for those reasons, I kind of think that real estate notes are highly advantaged over regular real estate, because not only do you have the backstop of the property value, but you have the additional factors with which notes lessen your risk over time. If you'd like to know more, you can fill out our survey and get to know us a little bit better. We can get to know you, and then feel free to drop us a line or give us a call, and we can answer any other questions that you might have. Thank you for your time.